Everyone thinks my daughter is taller than she is. Parents tend to overestimate their kids. As a teacher, I confront it all the time. Aspen doesn't deserve this grade. She's such a gifted writer. Lily has always been brighter than the other kids. My Jackson would never cheat. Every once in a while, the claims are so detached from reality as to make you wonder if these parents even know their children at all. What do you mean, Jackson wouldn't cheat? He lit a cigarette in a lunchroom last week. I think this style of parenting does kids a disservice. How can you help them move forward if you're not honest about where they're at right now? That's certainly the kind of father I've tried to be to Justine. She's kind, but she has a serious temper. She's bright in many ways, but struggles to memorize things. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying this. But, admittedly, we parents can sometimes go too far. Sometimes our kids are even more impressive than we think. That's why, if the rest of the world is giving you surprising feedback about your child, you almost certainly need to recalibrate, one way or the other. But what do you do when the rest of the world is just flat out wrong? It all started during the Super Bowl. My buddy Tim came over to watch with me, a lifelong bachelor. He's been spending a lot more time with me ever since my wife passed away last year. I don't think he liked her much. But whatever. I could use the company. Justine, who has suffered from a very serious lifelong allergy to sports, spent most of the night upstairs, though she did ask that I call her down when the halftime show was on. When that moment arrived, Tim looked at Justine as if he'd never seen her before. Wow. Talk about a growth spurt. Justine smiled shyly at him. Myself, I smiled incredulously. My daughter was a late bloomer, like both of her parents had been, a fact she bemoaned on a regular basis. Though halfway through 8th grade, Justine had not yet cracked 5 feet. What are you talking about? I said with a laugh. Has she grown? What do you mean? Jordan sputtered. She's, like, your height now. I rolled my eyes. At 5 feet 7 inches, I assumed he was making a short joke. Wouldn't have been the first time. Very funny. No, I'm serious, Tim said, squinting his eyes at her. I think she might have you, dude. Go back to back. I looked at Justine in disbelief. She, however, kept her eyes trained on the floor. Tim. Dude. She's like a foot shorter than me. Are you blind? Tim practically shouted it. He pulled me to my feet. Come here, he demanded to Justine, who reluctantly stood against me. I could feel the back of her head pressed in between my shoulder blades. What was Tim on about? Okay, you've still got her, Tim said with a laugh. But barely. It's like a half an inch, maybe. I looked at my friend in utter confusion. Tim. Not that it matters. But, like, do you know what an inch is? How tall do I look? Justine asked him suddenly. I don't know, like 5'6"? 5'7"? Justine flushed at his response. But not with embarrassment. Or delight. A kind of nervous energy? I was totally unmoored by both of them at this point. On what yardstick, Tim? She's 4'9". Wait. Are you kidding with me? But he wasn't. The conversation continued in much the same way, actually getting a bit heated, until I finally got the extendable tape measure from the toolkit. Tim and I measured Justine together. Well, sweetie, good news, I told her. You have been growing. You're officially 4'11" now. By this point, the halftime show was over, and my daughter wandered back upstairs. Justine was sick for most of the week following the Super Bowl. Her math teacher sent her to the nurse's office Monday afternoon because she looked ill. Just as she reached the door, though, she started dry heaving. Right there in the doorway. And then she fainted. The nurse said she'd managed to stop Justine's head from striking the floor by maybe half an inch. Tim's words from the night before echoed briefly in my mind. It's like half an inch, maybe. Justine missed school the next 4 days and spent them in bed with fever and shakes. I came home from work every day with a different kind of soup and bread from the local bakery, which she said made feeling sick totally worth it. Fun fact about Justine, her favorite food is soup and bread. She is determined to get a tattoo of a bread loaf behind her ear someday. I have not yet been able to dissuade her from this. By Sunday, she was feeling better, so I drove her 2 hours south to visit her grandparents, on her mother's side. We still saw them somewhat frequently, but not nearly as much as we did when my wife was still alive. Oh, goodness. You've been keeping her from us too much, my former mother-in-law said when she hugged me. I know, Mom, I said. She'd insisted that I call her that when I joined the family by marriage, and it had never felt right to stop. It's only been a month or so, though. That can't be, she said, gazing at Justine in awe as she talked to her grandfather across the room. She's grown half a foot since the last time. She must be taller than her mother was by now. I narrowed my eyes at that. Anna was 5'6", Mom. Yes. Justine's about there, she said wistfully. Oh. Our little baby. All grown up. I decided to let it go. The night passed without further incident. On the drive home, though, while pondering the strangeness of that conversation, and the one with Tim, I recognized something in a flash. A strange pattern, one that had been slowly emerging over the last few weeks. Justine has always been a social butterfly. But she won't get a phone until she turns 14, a harsh rule, you might think, but she spends so much time on her school-issued laptop that I can't bear to introduce another screen into her life yet. Anyway, because of this, her friends ring our home phone off the hook. Sometimes to hang out, but often just to talk. Ellie. Cadence. Zoe. Fiona. A seemingly endless parade of gossip from a seemingly endless parade of 13-year-olds. Almost always girls. But not anymore, I thought. For the last few weeks, more and more of those young voices asking if Justine was home had belonged to boys. Somehow, this had totally escaped my notice until that very moment. My head hadn't been screwed on quite right since Anna's death, I supposed. After a moment's thought, I decided to broach the subject. So, a lot of boys calling the house lately. A master of subtlety. Justine scoffed. Oh, God. Dad. What? I asked defensively. I can't ask about this sort of thing. You can ask, she grumbled. Doesn't mean I'll answer. She'd been that cagey about everything lately. How her day was. What she and her friends did. For months now, she'd been freaking out if I even went near her bedroom. Typical teenage girl stuff, I presumed. I tried to be good-humored about it. I'm just saying, I've noticed. Anyone I should be worried, Justine dry heaved. Okay, I'll drop it, I laughed. Can't fault a father for being. And at that, Justine vomited a harsh gray sludge all over the dashboard. I was so shocked that I slammed on the brakes right in the middle of the road. A car swerved around me, honking. I gaped at my daughter in open-mouthed horror, watching as she slowly turned to me. The whites of her eyes were glowing. Dad, I don't feel good. Justine expelled another round of toxic vomit onto my lap. The smell was not of bile, but rotting meat. I gagged myself as it reached my nostrils. Dad, she moaned, and then she went limp, head slumped down, her body only kept upright by the locked seatbelt strap. A string of gray sludge trailed from her mouth down to her thigh. I don't know how fast I was going as I drove to the nearest emergency room. This came out of her? The doctor asked when he reached our room. He was holding up a vial of the stuff she'd vomited, perhaps a little farther from his body than seemed normal. I nodded blankly, looking over at my daughter, unconscious on a hospital bed. What is it? I asked. It's mud, mostly, he said. Some chemicals, maybe. Minerals. Smells like sulfur, I think. We won't know for sure until we have it tested. What he said didn't surprise me much. You'd understand if you'd seen the stuff. Justine stayed at the hospital for 2 full days. I called my principal, a great guy, and explained the situation so I could stay with her. I told him everything, except about her eyes, which had shone inhumanly from the passenger seat. But only for moments. I'd probably imagined that. The doctors did some tests and ended up diagnosing her with dangerously low iron. I've got her on a supplement now. That ought to help with the whole vomiting mud thing. Oh, and they confirmed her height for me. She was too weak to stand, so they measured her while she lay. Not quite 5 feet, just like I'd thought. That doesn't seem right, the nurse said, and measured her again. She looked at her tape and made a strange noise, shrugged, then left for her lunch break. She hasn't been back to school since, but I did attend her parent-teacher conference last week. partially to apologize for her elongated absence, and partially, as an educator myself, at a different school nearby, to take the measure of her teachers. 3 of them mentioned her non-existent growth spurt. I grew fast myself, her math teacher said. The one who had sent her to the office when she looked ill. Felt hungry and weak for months. It just takes their insides a little while to get used to the new body, I suppose. I nodded, trying to look as understanding of the situation as she sounded. But how could I possibly be? I found a clump of Justine's long hair in the upstairs shower yesterday. Not the normal few strands. A clump. And her fever comes and goes. I don't have the slightest idea what's wrong with her. But I think she does. Last night, I began my sleep fitfully. I charge my phone on the dresser across the room at night. If it's right next to me, I'll turn the alarm off without getting up and fall back asleep. But I'd forgotten to put it on silent mode for the night. It must have woken me up 5 times with buzzing notifications coming in. Did I normally start my days with so many messages waiting for me? I did my best to ignore it. I was finally awoken, for good, by the sound of voices upstairs. Justine, I thought in a panic. I grabbed the baseball bat from under my bed. I snatched my phone from the dresser to use as a flashlight and bolted up the stairs. There was an odd glow that seemed to be almost writhing its way from under her closed door. The voices were louder now. Chanting. In her room. I reached for the door handle. It was locked. Her door didn't have a lock. Justine! I screamed, pounding on the door with my fist. The voices, in response, seemed to get quieter. But I could still hear them. Rhythmic. Not English. They sounded cruel. I slammed my shoulder against the door. Once. Twice. On the 3rd try, the frame splintered and the door smashed open. There was nobody. Nobody but Justine. Except, that wasn't quite true. Justine was there, standing in front of her body-length mirror. Her back was to me, and she wore a blood-red robe. But her reflection, no. It couldn't be. My daughter was 13 and looked 11. But in the mirror I saw a woman nearly grown. Taller. Prettier. She looked strikingly like her mother had, when she'd been young. And her face looked haughty and proud. I only glimpsed this for a moment. Justine turned to me, and her reflection was as it should have been once again. But this younger version of her, the real version, wore the same terrible expression. She stood amid a circle of candles lit on the floor. We looked at each other for a while. Then she spoke, her voice cold, "Go back to bed, Dad." I stood my ground. I had no idea what to do. There was nothing to do, perhaps. But I couldn't leave her. Eventually, I took a tentative step toward her. "Justine," I began. She stamped her foot, something I hadn't seen her do for years. Not since she was a true child. She screeched at me in anger, and her voice hardly sounded human. "I said, go to bed!" The candles around her feet all went out at once. And as she screamed her command, some power, lifted me from my feet. I was hurled from the room so violently that my head struck the wall across the hallway. The door slammed shut, and from behind it, I could hear my daughter begin to weep softly. I sat slumped against the opposite wall for several minutes, half-conscious. Eventually, I started to regain my senses. I rubbed my head, dazed. What the fuck just happened? I couldn't see anything. My phone's light had turned off. As I went to turn it back on, I noticed all the notifications I'd missed that night. There were calls. 8 of them. From my principal. There was also a text. I opened it. The principal, my boss, you understand, had typed in all caps, "Call me ASAP." It's about Justine. So I did. He picked up on the first ring. "Hank? Sorry to scare you, buddy." I had no clue what to say. Listen, I had a meeting with all the other administrators in the district earlier tonight. And I think I might have some information about what's happening with your daughter. Why she's been sick. It's not good, Hank. Are you sitting down? I looked around the hallway and chuckled darkly. I suppose I am, I said. Four other admin were talking, sort of hushed. I overheard. Students of theirs, girls, passing out at school. Terrible fevers. One threw up in the nurse's office, and it was like nothing they've ever seen. They haven't been able to get the smell out since. Jesus, I muttered. Is it a virus? Some sort of? Hank, it's worse than that. Yesterday they found a bunch of weird shit in one of these girls' bedrooms. Weird shit? Satanic, Hank. Like, occult shit. 4, I don't know. Rituals. The principal made a call to another parent. They searched one of the other girls' rooms. She'd been acting funny lately. Other people treating her funny. They found the same shit. Sounds like other parents have been notified. Nobody's sure what's going on yet. The girls won't talk. I couldn't talk. For a moment, there was nothing but the faint sound of my daughter, still weeping in her room. Hank? I didn't tell Em about your kid, if that's what you're worried about. I figured I'd leave that up to you. I mean, who even knows if it's the same thing? But they're thinking these girls might have been talking in secret online. I don't know. Conspiring. My throat was dry. What have they done? The parents? It's out of their hands, Hank. There's a full-blown investigation underway. Some of these girls have been real sick. From what I gathered, though, a couple of them have already been committed. Committed? To the hospital? No, that's admitted. Committed to a psych ward, Hank. Why? Do you think, could your Justine be? His voice trailed off. I was silent. But he took my silence as an answer. Finally, he spoke. I'll make sure your classes get covered, Hank. Good luck. Then the line clicked. Justine was taken this morning. I spent a long time answering questions from social agencies. A long time. Finally, they left. Now, the house is so quiet I want to scream. I don't know what's happening. I don't know what to do. I just want my little girl back. Though, I suppose, I'm not sure how little she is anymore. I'm a nurse. Last night, I saw something strange on the ER's security camera. I was sitting at the nurse's station, reading trashy tabloids and drinking coffee when Olga, the other nurse on duty, poked my arm. The little girl escaped, she said, with a giggle. What? She pointed to the security camera feed. Little Madeline was standing in the hallway, her image grainy and pixelated. We'd admitted Madeline at 8:23 p.m. A little girl, no more than 6. Her face covered in blood. She'd taken a nasty fall down the stairs. Dr. Thompson was worried she might develop a subdural hematoma, so we were keeping her for overnight. Ugh, no. She shouldn't be up. I paused, leaning towards the monitor. And where'd she get those clothes? She wasn't wearing the hospital gown we'd put her to bed in. No, she was wearing a black dress, white stockings, and shiny black shoes. As if she were all dressed up for church. Or a funeral. And she kept whipping her head back and forth. As if expecting someone to come down the hallway. Well, are you going to go get her or not? Olga said, looking up from her phone. Yeah, I'll get her. I pushed the chair out, leapt up, and speed-walked down the hallway. Madeline? I called as I rounded the corner. Maddle. My breath caught in my throat. There was no one there. I walked up to her room. Madeline? I called, poking my head in. She was sleeping peacefully in bed. In her hospital gown. With her 4 still attached. Weird. I walked back to the nurse's station. I couldn't help feeling a bit unsettled. I know kids sometimes do freaky shit, but there's no way a 6-year-old could reattach in 4. I plopped back down at the nurse's station. Olga raised her eyebrows at me. You found her? Yeah. She's sleeping in her room. I leaned towards her and lowered my voice. This is going to sound really weird, but I don't think she ever got out of bed. Oh, spooky, she said, with a grin. Maybe she's possessed by that slime thing you wouldn't shut up about last week. Back to texting. I narrowed my eyes at her. That's not something to joke about. Oh, really? What are you going to do, murder me? She held up her hands in front of her. I'm so scared. I rolled my eyes and turned back to reading about the half-mermaid that apparently washed up on the shores of Lake Erie. PSH, I can't believe people actually believe this stuff, I thought. It was 3:40 a.m. when it happened again. I happened to look up at the hallway, and the security monitor caught my eye. Madeline was standing just outside her door, in her dress and stockings. Except she looked scared this time. Look. It's Madeline again, I said, poking Olga. As I said it, one of the lights flickered out at the far end of the hallway. The video feed grew darker. Olga looked up from her texting. Who was she even texting after 3 a.m., and followed my gaze. Oh, it's the little demon girl again. Ha, ha. I narrowed my eyes at her. If you think all of this is so funny, you go check on her. Her eyes widened a bit. Okay. She slowly got up, taking as long as humanly possible. Then she disappeared down the hallway. I turned back to the video feed. Another light had gone out at the end of the hall. The video was darker and grainier now. But I could still make out Madeline's little form standing in front of the room, barely more than a silhouette. Click! Another light went out. Then another. And another. The hallway was quickly engulfed in darkness, until the only light on was the one above Madeline's door. Well, crap, I muttered to myself. We're going to need an electrician. I drank the last dregs of my iced coffee. When I put the cup down, I saw it. My blood ran cold. It was a shadow. A grainy, pixelated silhouette, roiling and shifting in the darkness. At first I thought it was Olga, coming from the other end of the hall. It wasn't. It was too tall, stretching from the ceiling to the floor. Too thin, no offense, Olga. I leaned into the monitor. What the hell? The shadow got darker. Larger. It slowly bled out of the darkness and into the light of the hall. Right next to Madeline. It was so dark and subtle, I thought it might be just some trick of the camera. Some error of the low light. But Madeline saw it too. Because she was backing away. Stretching her arms over the open hospital room door. Shaking her head violently. The shadow advanced. Beep. 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 My eyes snapped away from the security system to the nurse's console. No. Madeline's vitals were plummeting. Her heart rate, blood pressure. I shot up and sprinted down the hallway. Olga had just gotten there, her hand on the doorknob. Half the hallway was dark, just like in the feed. But no tall shadow like I'd seen, no Madeline standing in the hallway. Call Dr. Thompson. I screamed. She's in trouble. I flew past her, into the room. Madeline lay still and motionless on the bed. Her heart had stopped. I ran over. Started CPR. Come on, I screamed, internally. Please don't take her from us. Please. Blip. 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 Her heartbeat returned just as Dr. Thompson rushed in. I fell against the wall and began to sob. We kept Madeline in the hospital for a few more days, but I don't think we needed to. She seemed to recover quickly. As I checked her vitals to release her, I'd nearly forgotten all about the shadow. "How are you feeling?" I asked her as I took her blood pressure. "Great," Madeline said. She turned to her parents. "She saved me." "Aw, it was nothing." She glanced at me. "Not you," she said, condescendingly. "Maggie." "Maggie?" I furrowed my eyebrows at her. Ungrateful little kid. "Who's Maggie?" Madeline's mother uneasily stared at the floor. Her father wrapped an arm around her and coughed strangely. "Okay, then. You're all set," I said, ripping off the blood pressure cuff. "Yay!" she squealed. She grabbed her mom's hand and the two of them walked into the hallway. But the father stayed behind. "Thank you so much for everything," he said, with a smile. "As I understand it, you saved Madeline's life." "No, that was Maggie," I said, rolling my eyes. He coughed again, strangely. The curiosity bit into me. Completely overstepping my bounds as a nurse, I asked, "Who's Maggie?" "Her imaginary friend?" He sighed heavily. Sort of. When my wife was pregnant with Madeline, she was actually pregnant with twins." My heart stopped. Identical twins. "But one of them passed away in the womb," he continued. "We told Madeline, since we don't believe in keeping secrets. But it appears we made a mistake. Little Madeline has an overactive imagination. Always talks about Maggie as if she's actually still with us." He coughed again, strangely, and I realized it was to stop an impending sob. He reached out to shake my hand. "Thank you so much again." He turned and followed his family down the hallway. But all I could think about was the little girl, who looked exactly like Madeline, standing outside her door, protecting her.